Hello and welcome to Talking with Trailblazers here in the Women Empowered in Cannabis CBD group. I am your host, Kendra Losee of Moda Marketing. And have you figured out how to wrap up 2020? I know there's a million things that we want to wrap up from this year, but as business owners, one of the most important of those things is going to be our financials and making sure that all of our numbers are ready to go for 2020. So, we have a fabulous guest here today. Kara, I was so intent on getting your first name right this time. Kara Janowsky is here. She's the CEO and founder of Sonder Accounting, and she's here with us today to help us understand what we need to do to be able to start 2020, start 2021. We are not doing this year over again, ever, but she's going to tell us what we need to start 2021 off to the best start we can with our business. Welcome, Kara.
Hi, Kendra. I'm so excited to be here and share with you guys today.
I'm so excited that you're here. It's such a great topic and it's an important one, and we want to make sure that all of the women in this group know what they need to do in order to wrap up 2020 and get started and look forward to 2021. And who doesn't
Yeah,
want to do that?
yeah. I know. I'm very excited for this year to be ending, and it seems like it's come so quick because some of us are just finishing up filing our 2019 taxes, right, with the extended due date, and it feels like an abrupt turnaround. We're now 4 weeks away from 2021. We're all going to be filing our 1099s in January, and it feels like it's so quick, but I know all of us are ready for it and ready for what it means, which is a new year.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about how you started in the cannabis and CBD industry and working in that space? I know that you've been an accountant for a long time, so I'd love to hear a little bit how you got started, and then we're going to dive in to getting those questions answered. And by the way, speaking of questions, drop comments, you guys, questions in the comments if you want Kara to answer them for you. We've got an expert with us, so let's take advantage of her right now in all the best ways. So, how did you get
Yeah.
started in the industry?
Yeah, I actually started in activism. So in 2009, I found Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Hopefully, you guys have heard of them. They are an international network of young people who believe that the war on drugs has been a failure and that there are better ways that we can interact from a policy perspective to the best benefit of people. And so through SSDP, we started, I was involved in our local chapter here. I started working on local campaign initiatives. And actually, the first campaign initiative in 2009 or 2010 was an attempt to deschedule cannabis on the federal level. Obviously, that didn't happen, but it really sparked an interest in me because I met a network of people nationwide who, believed in cannabis use and believed that there are ways to use substances that aren't problematic. So I was involved with SSDP throughout my college experience. I became a chapter leader. And then from there, I continued with kind of the advocacy element and founded a local chapter of a women's empowerment organization in the cannabis space. And our local chapter had just this exceptional experience of building each other up and supporting women in cannabis. And it created this amazing network for me where I realized that women in our space and all businesses in our space were not being served from a financial services perspective, right? Even, this was about five years ago, many CPAs weren't even willing to interact with the cannabis space because they were scared. There wasn't clarity on whether or not it would affect their licensing or whatnot. So during this time, I had just left a dispensary management role and was working with a data analytics company serving the cannabis space. And further saw that folks weren't able to make significant financial decisions regarding their investments in their business. So in 2016, I launched Sonder, and we focused on the cannabis space since then. We do the bookkeeping, accounting, and everything up to the point of the income tax return for our clients. And one of the things that we help people with at this time of year is 1099 prep, right? And that's one of the things we're going to talk about, that I see people making these mistakes that are contrary to the IRS instructions. And I'm really excited to kind of tell you about this. So.
Well, since you led us directly into the first question, let's get started on that. Let's just dive right in. So, 1099s, businesses need to do them. What do we need to keep in mind as a business owner when it comes to making sure we have those covered and we're doing them the right way?
Yeah. So the first thing is, of course, you should collect your W-9 forms from your contractors, regardless of whether or not they will be issued a 1099. The W-9 form serves as basically an additional point of record for your relationship with this individual, and it also gives you the information that you need to identify if you owe them a 1099 or not, right? So, for example, you guys probably know that a C corporation is not required to receive a 1099. Okay, hopefully that's not a surprise. However, if you contracted a C corp, let's say a marketing corporation, to do some significant work for you, you paid them over the $600 threshold, you should still receive a W-9 from them just to validate that that is their entity type and that that is why you are not issuing them a 1099.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you file your income tax return, the payments to them are going to be reported there. So the IRS may have questions.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I ran into last year as a business owner is some of the vendors that I use and the partners that I use are PayPal or credit card. And that was
Yeah.
a sticking point for sure with a lot of people. Can you talk a little bit about that and what to expect?
Absolutely. You hit it on the head right there, which is PayPal and credit card companies are required by the IRS to issue their own 1099 forms. So when you pay a vendor through those methods, you do not need to issue the 1099 from your company for those payments. So let's say you made some payments to one vendor in checks and some payments to that same vendor in credit card. You'd be looking specifically at the payments above the $600 threshold that are made by check or not credit card, essentially, and not PayPal.
Absolutely. So, is there any other things that we need to consider when we're looking at filing the 1099s for our business? I want to make sure we cover those before we jump on to simplifying our year end.
Yeah, of course. The final thing that people often miss, especially if you're using an online provider for 1099s, is issuing a statement of payments. So it's explicitly stated in the IRS instructions that you have to not only provide your contractor with the 1099, but also a breakdown of what payments are included in that 1099. So I find it useful also because that's your opportunity to kind of reconcile with the partner, the contractor, and make sure you're on the same page about what payments were issued to them. And that gives them an opportunity to bring up any discrepancies.
Definitely. And I've seen that work firsthand with myself and others, just in terms of what that needs. So, if we're
Yeah.
looking at the 1099s, that's one thing that we need to make sure we're taking care of this year.
Mhm.
There's also inventory wrap up and some of those other things that we want to touch on. But I love
Mhm.
that you mentioned financial tools to simplify your year end because
Yeah.
God help us, no one wants to be dealing with this. So I'm so happy there's people like you who do. So please
Cool.
tell us, what can we do to simplify it?
Yeah. Oh, I love the work that I do because I get to help people with some of the most stressful thing that they're going to do in their business every day is financial management and planning for taxes, right? It's obviously a huge concern that we're not doing everything that we could be to save for taxes and to minimize on
Mm-hmm.
taxes. So the first tool that I recommend folks look into is Mile IQ. Okay. Mile IQ is an app that goes on your phone for tracking mileage. Now, in 2020, this might not have been super relevant for you, but as things start to pick up in 2021, if you're driving a vehicle for business purposes, the IRS requires what's called a contemporaneous mileage log. That means you can't just go to your calendar at the end of the year and pull all of the drives
Who
and
would do
record
that?
that mileage. Who would do that?
Who would do that?
I've seen so many people doing that. And, the IRS considers contemporaneous to be no less than monthly. So if you're doing that monthly, that's okay. But let's be real, whenever we do that, we're missing drives,
Yeah.
right? We're missing that little trip to the office supply store. We're missing a casual run to a lunch with a colleague. And so Mile IQ tracks your drives as you drive. It's only $5.99 per month, and all you have to do is swipe left or right for business or personal to capture those drives and get your mileage deduction.
Perfect. That's a really important one. So mileage IQ is the first tool. What's the
Yeah.
second one?
Yeah, the second one is Gusto. If you're a business with payroll, and that does now include self employed individuals, Gusto is an incredible tool to manage your payroll. They actually pay all of your payroll tax filings on your behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in the past, a lot of the times you would go to an accountant or somebody like ADP, one of those major companies, right, to process your payroll. But Gusto puts this process in the hands of the employer and makes it really accessible.
Oh, nice. Yeah, payroll always sounds so daunting and just like a pain.
Gusto makes it easy. And, we partner with Gusto to do the payroll on the clients that we manage because even as an accountant, I prefer it.
Yeah, I mean, whenever and this is a side note, I grew up when my parents had their own business, so I just remember my mom having to manually do payroll and like, it's payroll time, and it
Mm.
just became like such a daunting thing in my head because she would just disappear every week for for several hours to try and
Yeah.
make it all work. So it's nice that there's tools like this so you don't have to. All right, so
Yeah.
Mile IQ and Gusto, and what's the third tool that can help all of us out at this time of the year?
Yeah. The third tool is QuickBooks Online. And Intuit has done so much in the last several years, gobbled up quite a bit of market share, and it's not always been seen as a positive thing. But what I will say is QuickBooks Online is our chosen platform to manage the financials of a small business up to 20 million in revenue. To a certain extent, there are limitations to the online platform, but what it does is just like Gusto, it makes it accessible to the business owner. In the past, if you worked with an accountant, they might manage your QuickBooks desktop file, and you might never see your own financial data until the end of the year.
Yeah.
And QuickBooks Online allows you to run reports on a more consistent basis so you can see where your financials are standing.
That's fantastic. Yeah, any tools like that that can give you those insights that you need to your business are invaluable. To be able to make sure that you're staying on top of things and know what to expect, especially in years like this year where everything changed on a dime and where, some businesses responded right away and some took a while to get their feet under them, and create that stability again. So those three tools sound really helpful. I pretty much downloaded Milo IQ while you were talking. Um,
Love that.
it's obviously less driving this year, but next year's going to be different, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so, okay, so one of the things that came up, and you guys watching, be sure to drop your questions in the comments because it's not often that you have an accounting expert at your fingertips, or at least it's not often that I have an accounting expert at my fingertips. So, want to make sure that we're getting your questions asked while Kara is still here. And so, one of the things that you mentioned is the calculating the value of your inventory for tax purposes. That's something that's
Yeah.
incredibly important for the people in our group that have product companies. So, can you speak to that and how it is done?
Of course. So, the first and most important thing is not to miss your opportunity to count your inventory as close to 1231 as you can. All of the work on valuing the inventory can be done in the following weeks after you do the count, but you have to make sure you get that count as close to 1231 as you can. Once you have that count, the biggest thing that people make the mistake of doing is to value their inventory on their books as the retail value. Okay, the IRS does accept this methodology. However, it's typically the least beneficial. And please don't take this as tax advice. Your individual scenario may vary, but valuing your inventory at retail value means that you're going to have a higher number recorded as the value on the books. that means you're going to be able to deduct less of your cost of goods that went into production of that inventory. So rather than using the retail value, we generally use the cost method. And that's basically what it sounds. It's calculating all of the different costs that went into the production of your goods or the purchase of your goods if you buy wholesale on bulk, and adding those up throughout the year and using that to identify the value of each individual inventory item and therefore the value of your inventory. I do have a worksheet for this, as it can be somewhat complicated and abstract to folks, but that's the general concept. So the final step, once you have the inventory valued, is to, of course, adjust it in your books, right? So right now, you probably have an entry on 1/1/2020 or 12/31/2019, recording the beginning inventory value for this year. And you need to make an entry in your accounting to adjust that for your ending inventory of 2020.
That's so interesting. I have so many questions.
Yeah, it's definitely an introduction to this concept. Anybody who manages a business that has inventory will be required to navigate this process to report it on their taxes.
So what you're saying is it's better to do a cash based. If I'm getting this right? I've got to dig deep into my old accounting classes. So it's better to do a cash based accounting method versus accrual for making sure that you are keeping everything contained in 1 year for your inventory.
We're
Is
actually
that
not referring to cash versus accrual.
okay?
So this is specifically the inventory valuation method.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
That's what I needed to know. Okay, awesome. So
Yeah.
then when you're looking at the inventory valuation method, you want to make sure it's cash based, cost based,
Cost based.
cost
Yep.
based. So I'm mixing
As
up
opposed
everything
to
is what you're
recent.
doing.
No, no, you're fine. I know this is very high level. And, the purpose of this, really what you should take away from this, if you're watching, is not to use the retail value unless you have identified that that is beneficial for you tax wise or for another financial purpose. So when you use the retail value, some people might make a strategic decision to do that, but make sure that you're evaluating that before you just do it because it's the simplest way.
Okay, so basically, these are great ways you're arming everybody with great questions to ask their accountants so that way they can make sure that they're doing it in the most beneficial way for each person. Fantastic. I love it.
True.
This is what happens when I try to be smarter than I am. Oh, the reality of it. So I think that's really important. I think that that's something that we need to pay attention to. There's one question in the comments, and I know a question came up before in the event announcement, so I want to make sure we cover that one first. So Wendy said that she would love to learn if there were any formulas that are good for forecasting revenue for a CBD e-commerce business. How can people
Yeah.
forecast for 2021?
That is a great question. The short answer is we don't use a formula per se, but rather a process, right? So we typically are looking back at the prior year. If you have a full year of data, that's a great point of reference to begin looking at. And we compare that to the industry trends that we see on the whole. So, for example, there are two major holidays that we see a significant bump in sales in the CB space. That's around Thanksgiving time, that's around the 420 holiday. Okay. We also see bumps around May, interestingly, and in the holiday season in December and January. Whether or not that's folks who are hanging out with family more and need a little bit of relief, is to be seen or to be known. But what we do is we look at that historical data and attempt to predict the future trends based on what we've seen in the past, right? This is how we do it in any business. Other businesses have the benefit of benchmarking and being able to see a longer term history of their own business and others in the similar industry. And we lack that in ours. So when we do this type of forecasting work for our clients, we are pulling in benchmarking data from other similar industries to compare it to ours. So for example, if we have a client who produces a supplement style CBD product, right? Perhaps it's an ingestible capsule. We're going to be using the supplements industry and benchmarking against that to sort of influence our forecast for the business. Now, forecasting is incredibly individualized, right? It's going to depend very much on your product lines and your campaigns surrounding your products. So if you know that maybe April isn't a great month for you, but May you have a spike, we're going to optimize your campaigns leading up to that May period and see what we can do to make that, to influence the revenue in the direction we want it to go.
I hope that answered Wendy's question, because I feel like there's hope for like a quick and easy, okay, here's the formula. What advice would you give to somebody that launched midway through the year? So if they don't have all of that historical data and now they're trying to, say they launched in beginning of Q3 this year, so they have less, half a year worth of data of information, how would you recommend that they forecast? How do you recommend that they tackle that?
Yeah, great question. In general, I would be very conservative with revenue projections and be fairly aggressive in your expense calculations, right? This is a fairly risk averse approach to financial planning and financial forecasting. In all reality, the benchmarking data can come into play there, but it is difficult at that early stages. I tend to focus in the 3 to 12 month phase. I tend to more focus on marketing ROI and tracking the campaigns to understand whether or not they're successful, because that's what you have control over in those early phases. That's what you're starting to experiment with running ads, or with and by ads I mean in magazines, right, or things like that. And so that's what we focus on in the early stages, is identifying what is returning the most significant on the marketing campaigns.
Okay, perfect. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Lori just asked a question that said, I started my business in 2019, but I didn't launch until May 2020. Can we carry over expenses from 2019 even though we didn't have any revenue?
This depends. I wish I could answer this on our live. Unfortunately, it does depend on your individual tax circumstance, Lori. I'm not sure whether you filed in 2019 and how you filed in 2019. And I would have that conversation directly with your tax accountant to make the best decision. In general, it is possible. Sometimes you are able to forward your startup costs to the following year, again, depending on how the tax returns are handled.
Awesome. Great answer. Good question. Thank you guys. Those are the questions we have. You guys, we have a few more minutes here if you want to drop in any questions. I wanted to know, so I think there's a couple things, right? So when we look at, and this kind of goes to Lori's question. So if we're looking at production and we're looking at inventory and just general supplies, right? So this goes back to what you were saying in terms of calculating the value of the inventory. So if I have, for example, packaging and I have labels and I have product, whether it's assembled or not, but how do you actually recommend that we calculate for each of those things? Is that all going into the larger inventory, or is that something separate?
Yeah.
And does it need to be calculated separately?
Generally, yes. Yes, generally we're recording inventory, and it does depend on the accounting setup, but typically we see a minimum of packaging supplies, ingredient type inventory, and finished materials, as well as any work in progress is also recorded at that time. Depending on the level of detail within the accounting, we might go as far as to say they have, $5,000 of bottling inventory, $3,000 of labeling inventory, etc., that is planned for the products to be sold in 2021.
Okay. That's so fascinating. I don't know if, so I mentioned my parents used to have a store, and the store was a home and garden supply store. So whenever someone says inventory, we would all spend a week. My sister was 5 when they started, and I was 12. We would spend a week just like counting nails, and counting little tiny parts for home and garden supplies. So we'd end up greasy messes. But so whenever someone says inventory, I just cringe at those memories of 10 years of counting nails and screws and washers and stuff like that. So
To
I'm
be
going to,
totally fair, we hope that people would have that level of detail. The reality is most business owners are content with a per item level of inventory accounting, right? So that means they're tracking the different types of labels, etc. They're in our industry, we don't really have those small parts. They are tracking small pieces of vaporizer equipment.
mm-hmm.
So as small as is feasible within the products that they're purchasing, we are tracking that from the inventory perspective.
And having everything digital makes it all so much easier.
Yes. Yeah, it's really interesting because, implementing an enterprise resource management or planning system, an ERP system, is one of the most cost involved investments when we see these product manufacturers start up. They can range anywhere from a few thousand to 150, $200,000 for these
Easily.
systems.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah. But that is what simplifies your inventory management. It clarifies you don't have to do the inventory on a monthly basis, but rather you just compare at the end of the year or quarterly or whatever your frequencies are.
Yeah, and I hope that none of you have to have your 5-year-old children out there counting nails and parts. That scares
Yes.
people. But yeah, no, I think this is really valuable information that you've been sharing with everybody. We're wrapping up, and if you guys have any questions for Kara, be sure and drop it in. Tag her. She's in the group. She has a lot of really great, useful information. And speaking of that, I know she has something she wanted to share with you guys. Kara, you want to explain what it is?
Yeah, thank you. So I wrote this book, The 10 Biggest Financial Mistakes That We See CBD Business Owners Making. This is very much geared towards the CBD product industry, whether you're a manufacturer or a wholesale bulk purchaser who is then retailing that out. We see these types of businesses making these 10 mistakes over and over again. They're fairly straightforward. They're easy to fix if you at least are aware of them. But I recommend checking out my book. There's the link there. It's 10mistakes.sonderaccounting.com, and it's a free book. Just trying to share some wisdom that we've seen over the last 4 years.
Fantastic. Thank you for compiling that. And as part of that, I want to make sure that Lori's asking how we can connect with you and contact you. I'm going to put your website down at the bottom again. How would you prefer people reach out to you?
Yeah, so we are at sonderaccounting.com. You can also use my email, which is kara@sonderaccounting.com. That's the best way to reach us. Our phone number is also on the website.
Fantastic. And like I said, she's active in the group too. So tag her in a
Yeah.
question and she'll answer it. Or
Yeah, I
she'll tell you
will.
how to better reach her for a longer conversation. So thank you
Yeah.
guys for joining us. Kara, thank you so much for your time. I know that Kara reached out to make sure that you guys had this information for year end. So I really appreciate you doing that because it is really important that all of us are wrapped up to finish this year well and oh my god, prepared for 2021.
Yes. If you have any questions about, wrapping up your accounting for the end of the year, this is what we do. I'd be more than happy to help you understand what you need to do so that when you get ready for taxes, you kind of walk in the door and they smile at you because they know you're on top of it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for being here and we will see you again
Thank
next
you.
time. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Kendra.